Today's video is brought to you by our friends over at Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, if you ever wanted to just learn something in a fun, effective way without watching just a boring lecture video on the internet that probably puts you to sleep faster than anything else, well, that's where our friends over at Brilliant are here, with actual content that is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, professionals from MIT to Caltech to Duke to Microsoft, all the way to Google. Critical thinking is an incredibly important part about learning, and not only just problem solving as well. These are very important pillars. Some people think memorizing is the only thing you have, but the reality of it is Brilliant provides you tons of options at your own pace, really. So whether you're a beginner to a topic or an absolute advanced expert, then you will have an entire course and challenge tailored to you. Developing a powerful learning habit is an absolute important part. It's like working out. You got to learn a little bit every day and you got to build yourself up. And there's a bunch of lessons available. You can look at things like data science. You can look at programming. You might even want to learn how LLMs work in an AI as well. And of course, thinking about where to start might be the first obstacle you have to cross. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for a free full 30 days, check out brilliant.org/SOG, or just click the link in the description. And you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. That said, let's head into the video. Today's video is centered around Opera GX, ladies and gentlemen, a deep dive into one of the most popular gaming internet browsers that is currently available. Now, to give you an idea, Opera is a company that has been around since the mid-90s, really, since the beginning of the internet for the general user. To give you an idea, Opera's first release was April 10th, 1995, meaning that it is almost as old as me, ladies and gentlemen, 30 years old myself. So me and Opera, we grew up in the same sandbox, so to speak. Now, you probably know a lot about Opera GX from its Saucy brand account, where they absolutely roast the Payday 3 player base, the remaining few that there are, and unironically call Sneeko an entire cuckold. So again, this might be a big positive for some people that a gaming community browser is topped this hard into the community. And of course, if you can appreciate a little bit of that edginess, it's right there waiting for you. But again, you've probably also seen your favorite content creators talk about Opera GX's browser, its GX Corner functionality, the ability for you to limit certain functionalities to get, I assume, better performances, and you've probably seen massive collaborations with big superhero companies like Vought International. But again, you also just have probably went to their website and wanted to understand how you get an unparalleled gaming and browsing experience, and if setting those limits on your hardware is really all that important when most of it is controlled by an actual scheduler anyways, but those are things we'll dive into a little bit into the video. Is using Discord and Twitch really important from the sidebar? Is this the browser for gamers? I really wanted to see if this was really going to give me a tangible benefit or if this is just marketing gimmicks. Opera is not new to gaming browsers. In fact, if you were a proud user of the original Nintendo Wii, you probably used the internet channel and used an Opera browser itself. Heck, if you had a Nintendo DS, you could actually buy the Nintendo web browser, which was effectively just an Opera browser that you could use to browse 4chan or really any dodgy website using your Nintendo DS. Nowadays, most modern game consoles, I'm looking at you, Sony and Nintendo, don't even have web browsers built in. But I guess that's effectively what Xbox's, single one benefit really is, that you can actually browse Google and play a video game at the same time. What a novel concept. But of course, Opera GX is not designed for PlayStation 5 or Nintendo Switch or even the Xbox Series systems. In fact, if anything, Opera GX is basically just a browser for PC gamers who want to have extra gaming benefits, the ability to optimize their Chrome browser so that it doesn't chew up all of the RAM available on their system, and of course, provide you with a whole slew of features that I'll say many other browsers don't provide. Now, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding Opera GX in the last few years. Allegations of Chinese spyware, the ability for your personal information to be sold on the open market, basically by this one company. These are very, very serious claims. And I want to take the time today to really dig in and kind of answer the question, is Opera GX really worth getting? Now, for full, transparency's sake, I have been offered sponsorships by Opera GX before. I'm actually, I would say, on pretty friendly terms with the Opera GX social media manager. Opera GX is very much in tune with the gaming community. Now, that being said, you might be like, Mudo, why didn't you just take the bag and decide to, promote Opera GX? It would have been an easy amount of money that you could make. And you're right, it can't always be a lot of money. But the thing about sponsorships on this channel is, for one, I have to be able to actually use the product, right? Unfortunately, with Opera GX, it only is available for Windows and Mac, all right? How much gaming are you doing on a Mac, even compared to Linux these days? It doesn't have a Linux port. And the other thing is, also with sponsorships, it goes without saying, I can never accept an actual software or an account that comes from the actual sponsor. It always has to be something that is bought at our company through an unidentifiable account or a credit card, right? So we get the experience that the viewer will as soon as they purchase a service. Now, looking at Opera GX's forums, there clearly is interest in Linux, like 134,000 views on this one thread where people do want to know and they want Opera GX on their Linux systems. Now, again, it's wild to me that looking into Opera GX, a lot of the source isn't even really available for this browser. Like, if I go to Opera Software, they definitely talk about, things like the SSH key authority, the DNS UI. Nothing necessarily is over here for the Opera browser itself as compared to, Brave browser, which you can download the source for right here. Microsoft Edge, where you can download the source as well, too. So I really feel that in a world of open source operating systems, not operating systems, but open source web browsers being the norm, I don't really feel comfortable using something that doesn't really put itself out there for scrutiny by everyone around them. So these are just a few examples of why I can never take a sponsorship from Opera GX and why I don't personally use it. I can't use it, and out of principle, it just doesn't, I wouldn't even want to. Okay, so that all being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to Opera GX. Now, if you actually go to their website here real quick, Opera GX is a browser built specifically for gamers. Get an unparalleled gaming and browsing experience on mobile and desktop. Set limits on CPU, RAM, and network usage. Use Discord and Twitch from the sidebar. So here I've got a Windows virtual machine because anytime I use software like this, I always have a specific virtual machine because, again, if I don't trust a piece of software, I'm going to keep it contained and locked in its own ecosystem. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this is my computer right now. Let me give you a fat neofetch. I am, in fact, an Arch Linux user. Now, if you look carefully into the system, you can see that I've got a Ryzen 9 5950X with 32 threads, an NVIDIA RTX 4090 GPU, and about 128 gigabytes of system memory. Now, this is an incredibly overkill system, so for some reasonable scientific understanding, I want to see how much Opera GX actually consumes. And I also want to see what it would reasonably run like on an average gaming computer. So I'm going to look at the Steam hardware survey and kind of make a virtual machine that almost approximates what I'm looking at. So here you can see that the most popular OS is Windows 10 64-bit. I'm running Windows 11. System RAM is 16 gigabytes. So I'm actually going to do 16. I think it's 384 to exactly match, what is the system memory of an average user. So around 16 gigabytes. Now, of course, it says physical CPUs is 6. I'm going to assume that means, 6 actual, CPU, or that would mean 6 CPUs, but also dual cores. So around 12 threads, 6 CPUs, and of course, each of them being, multi-threaded, so 2 cores per CPU. And if you look at the actual GPU, I have a 4090, so this is going to be something that is obviously outside the norm. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with all that being said, we're going to basically set this up and ready to go, and we're going to fire up this virtual machine and basically run through Opera GX. So setting up the browser was pretty simple. I went through theming the system, basically selecting what I wanted enabled. For some reason, I couldn't import my actual information for Brave. It could literally detect every single browser on my system but the fucking Brave browser. Don't know what that's all about, but that's pretty much the world we sat into. Now, once that's done, I actually had Opera GX ready to go, and immediately starting it up, it actually begins pretty quickly. Now, Opera GX right here from the get-go has this kind of a style going for it. It's a bit of a gamer-oriented style. Hell, the actual default homepage is the GX Corner, which again gives you release information for various games, lets you play some free games, and if you're listening real closely, it actually has its own sound effects. In fact, if you go up here and just type in Google, that's not me editing in a sound effect. That is actually sound effects built into a fucking web browser. Now, if you go to the settings right over here, the first thing you absolutely should do before you stick knives into your ears is probably go out and, disable the keyboard sounds and disable those browser sounds. So looking into it real carefully, it's got a whole bunch of theme options. Beyond all of it, it's also got a lot of privacy and security features. So like a built-in ad blocker, which works relatively well as any other Chrome browser's ad blocking functionality. So if YouTube ads scare you, or any ad on the internet, you've got the options. It's also got the ability to block various trackers if you wanted to, and a free VPN service. But we'll look into that a little bit later. It's got a bit of video and photo enhancements through something known as RGX, and like most tech products these days, it's got fucking artificial intelligence built right in. Now on the left-hand side, you could basically add in multiple social media services, so if you wanted to use Twitter, God forbid, within your browser, you can. If you wanted to access Discord with the boys, you can, just by going to the Discord app and hitting continue in browser. So mind you, nothing here is effectively so mind-blowing. Like this tab over here effectively leads you to Spotify. It just opens another tab for anybody that just wants to have music playing in the side on their system. And again, there's a bunch of different variants that you can involve, so you can go and dig up YouTube Music. One thing you might be noticing is, whoa, Moodle, what's up with your browser? Is there like a GPU error going on? No, actually, the browser is so customizable, you can actually install a whole bunch of different mods that changes the background music, the keyboard sounds. If that interests you, wallpaper's okay. Browser sounds, the theme, and something known as shaders. So when you're browsing the internet, you can add things like chromatic aberration and glitches and a whole bunch of fucking shaders to your actual browsing experience. I love this one for San Andreas. It's just a money effect flying around. Yeah. Oh boy, that's what I want to see when I browse the internet. Just dollar bills falling. It's kind of insane how you can just like add even more. Like what does 8bitter do? Oh hell yeah, dude. Oh, this is gangster. Oh, book a road test. Let's go, dude. Oh man, you can barely read what's written here. This is fun for like 50 seconds maybe. After that, it's just gonna burn your eyes out. Now, look, all memes aside, okay, beyond all the shaders and graphical controls, one of the big selling points is GX Control in here. So what this allows you to effectively do is monitor the CPU usage and the RAM usage of the tabs that you have open. Now, this is a big feature that they absolutely like to showcase, where it allows gamers to basically identify the pressure points in their browser and optimize things. So obviously you've got, your hot tabs killer. So if you wanted to destroy that drive test, tab because it's using 53 megs, it's gone, it's slashed. Now, if you look at the network limiter, you can see that obviously you can control how much bandwidth your device uses. You've got a RAM limiter, so if you wanted to, for some reason, kill the RAM usage of the browser all the way down to, I don't know, let's say 1.5 gigs, it'll warn you. You can give it a hard limit, which will actually suspend and kill tabs in the background. But again, you can also go down and, basically tell it to limit CPU usage. So if you wanted to say, hey, listen, go all the way down to 17% of my usage, it will kill the actual performance. So you can see that it is, in fact, sluggish. So if I turn that off, it'll actually be much more easier to use. So these do work, but ultimately I feel like this is going to be a placebo effect, and I'll explain why. As far as CPU limiters go, this is honestly not a required feature. Most modern operating systems like Windows, Mac, or Linux are pretty good with scheduling systems. Now, a process scheduler, or just a scheduler in general for an operating system, is literally, it's designed to basically, put certain processes above others and schedule it in a way where usually higher, required processes, processes that are typically more of a priority, get more, system resources, or usually are brought in, first for the next time slices. So this is usually done at an operating system level, right? And again, you can read further into this because it is a very, very, very complicated read-up. Most operating systems, if not all of them, whether you use, Linux's kernel, whether you're a Mac OS user, whether you're a Windows user, you typically should rely on the actual OS to handle all of this. It's never, in my opinion, beneficial to get in the way and try to force a game-boosting software to affect any process in the way. And generally, even looking on Stack Exchange from some pretty reputable, individuals talking into this for game development, they've usually said, in games, we treat the OSs out of our hands. We trust the OS vendors to make sufficiently good choices to support the apps their customers want to use. So choosing a scheduler is generally not a problem that game developers solve. If you're making a game and have run into a problem along the way, they can help and basically jump into this. So again, when I look at game boosting software like from Razer, for instance, right, where the entire idea is, hey, we're going to manage and stop non-essential processes and apps, free up valuable resources, and RAM for a smoother experience. I always think all of these tools are effectively just placebos, and jumping in front of your operating system and forcing it to effectively, kill certain applications or, manage RAM and manage processes for you is usually more of a hindrance rather than a help. And there's software that I just don't trust in general, right? Like again, game boosting software, while it is a placebo, I really don't want any random software off the internet to just control what I'm doing on my system or start to make changes. Even if it's something where, again, I have to route my information through a certain VPN or proxy because I could suddenly get better latency, it's just, again, I really don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. And of course, then you get into weird situations where, again, these websites look like they're straight up pulled out of like the early 2000s, like a free game speed up tool, close startups, free memory, tune up your network. And again, a lot of these are just basic fixes that you don't even need a application for anyways. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not a scientist in a lab here, so again, if you have any objections with the testing methodologies, feel free to tell me in the comment section below. But in this situation, we wanted to just test if this browser was giving, actually better performance versus its competitors, or was this all within the margin of error and all of these CPU and GPU limiters are just effectively marketing gimmicks. So at this moment in time, I wanted to pit a bunch of browsers against each other. Firefox, Opera GX, Microsoft Edge, Brave Browser, Google Chrome, and the ungoogled Chrome project, which you can download and build yourself. So the way that we tested this was we didn't have any extensions, anything running, just the browser at default settings. The only caveat being that I disabled all the ad blockers and the anti-trackers because I felt that these would add unnecessary extensions and memory usage, which would be unfair if you're comparing totally naked browsers with, these, bloated browsers in a way too. I did this because I consider ad blocking and ad tracking to be extensions, but that's really, my opinion right here. So in this quick and dirty test over here, one thing we did was just run a 1080p version of the video that you're seeing right here on the screen. Again, running in a loop, exact same quality for all these browsers, just one tab with the video open. And again, if you look at the actual memory consumption, what is surprisingly alarming to me is the fact that Firefox is actually so resource intensive. Basically consuming most of the memory that we've seen. In fact, the CPU usage on higher was on average higher. Now, obviously, Opera GX in this situation is probably the worst of the Chrome browsers if we're looking at, the memory usage in this situation too. But again, after that comes obviously Microsoft Edge, then the Brave browser, and surprisingly Google Chrome, which people have always really touted as one of the most bloated browsers in this situation, or, in general. Obviously, dead last in the ringer was Chromium, which obviously is de-Googled. It is as base as you can get, built straight from the source. So that was really the one video test. Now, obviously, we're gamers here on this channel, so chances are if you're using a gaming browser, you probably also do some gaming as well. Now, in this situation, I'm playing Cyberpunk 2077, which is something that I would play while I would have something on the second monitor usually, as I'm going through side missions and gigs. Now, in this situation, I've decided to set the actual game's resolution to 1080p. Everything is effectively maxed out, and I'm running the game with the Psycho settings for ray tracing modes. Now, I don't have the path tracing enabled, nor do I have DLSS frame generation enabled, because I don't know what that does to frame rate testing necessarily. It might just screw things up a little bit. So I decided to just keep things pretty sweet and simple. Now, in this situation, the way that I tested each and every single browser was I effectively had a stream open at 1080p. So here's Charlie, say hi. I'm watching him on a, on a separate monitor right here. Just imagine he's playing 1080p live stream. It's running, encoding right now. And I made sure this was standard 1080p for every single browser by forcing YouTube to go that route. The other thing is, obviously, I also put in another tab, which is the standard default tab that each browser would have, just to see if they would really add more bloat to these systems too, or how they deviate things. Now, in the situation, obviously, running Cyberpunk 2077 without any form of internet browsing runs the game at around 74 frames per second. I tested this using the in-game benchmark for every single run, okay? Just because the open world nature of the game, if I were to test in the world, there would be so many dynamic things that it would just render any form of benchmarking pointless. Now, with Opera GX running, you can see that on average, these browsers consume around 8 to 10% of the CPU as they're, transcoding this video. Now, obviously, I've enabled things like hardware acceleration for these systems. That being said, I made sure that all of the defaults were pretty much enabled. The only thing that isn't enabled, from my understanding on here, is, again, those ad blocking and the anti-tracking functionality, because I believe those to be just separate extensions. Now, Opera GX came out to be 68 frames, which is great. In fact, out of all the browsers we've done, it is the best test. Now, Brave came in at 66 frames, Chrome came in at 66 frames, Edge came in at 65 frames, and Firefox came in at 65 frames as well. Now, the reason why none of this is super impressive is this is well within the margin of error. Now, I tried Opera GX a second time, and the frame rate was surprisingly as low as Firefox and Edge. So clearly, it doesn't necessarily mean that each and every single run is going to be perfect. There's going to be deviances. There's going to be, again, things that fall within that margin of error. So what have I learned? That even with these, gaming-oriented browsers, it's not so much their CPU limitations and RAM limitations you have to worry so much about. By forcing those limitations, all you're doing is causing a hindrance onto the browser itself. Now, sure, you could force Opera to necessarily kill the CPU usage by a big fraction. But the thing is, it's only going to hurt your quality of watching a live stream on YouTube, or if you just have any browsing on the side, which I don't think people want at the end of the day. Now, realistically, you can imagine that as you put more load onto your system, the worse the performance is necessarily going to get. If you started to play 4K video across the board, HDR and everything, I'm sure the performance for your games will just consistently keep tanking. But everything that I've seen here so far falls far within that margin of error, and really no matter what browser you go with, especially in the Chromium, stage, you'll be fine, even with Firefox, and I'm sure, if you extrapolate this to Vivaldi, a bunch of other different browsers, it's going to all give you the same stuff. So one thing that I wanted to look at even closer with Opera GX was the one tab that I just seemingly couldn't close, which was the GX Corner app. So let's actually look at this with a closer lens. Now, if you look carefully over here, starting up Opera GX, the first thing you actually see is this corner, right? So again, I'm just going to start it fresh, brand new, go to Opera GX, and of course you can see it begins with the GX Corner. Now, obviously, if you go into the settings page right over here, you can actually go all the way down to full browser settings, and if you look at things like the GX Corner, for instance, just searching for it, what you can do is you can stick that into a sidebar, but it really doesn't seem like you can turn anything off. And based on what I've seen with, again, other systems and, older posts, maybe it was disabled at one point, or you could actually turn it off. The point is, it exists and permeates in, Opera GX at any moment. So alongside having one tab, you always have a GX Corner tab that's also open as well. Now, one thing I also wanted to say is when I installed this, it actually had this setting defaulted, run when my computer starts. Now, I have never had to use a browser where it needed to install or run whenever my computer was operating. This is not something I am ever comfortable with, and I wanted to talk about it because it was something that was weird to me. This is the only time I ever had to go into the startup settings for my Windows installation and actually find where Opera GX was just to basically disable it. Now, you can't see it over here anymore, but since I've disabled it. But yeah, this was something here. Anyways, going back to Opera GX, a quick little view of this is what you get is a release calendar. So if you want to obviously, look at what's coming up in the, future when it comes to gaming, you can see that on, for Windows, I can see, games that are coming out. Like, for instance, July 11th, I get Angerfoot. And obviously you can, include other consoles like PlayStation, Xbox. I find it funny Linux is in here because they don't actually have a Linux version of this browser, but they definitely will showcase upcoming Linux games. And again, if you look at what they offer more, they've got entire game sections. You can play games like Burning Motor, so you just click over here. It loads up the GX Games application, and you can play, again, Flash games or anything inside here. So if you wanted to experience the Newground era, it's all available inside the GX Corner, okay? Now, if you go back to the GX Corner, you can see that they got the free-to-play section. So again, it links you to free-to-play versions of video games, like if you want to play Genshin Impact. Now here you can see that I can't reach sites. Now, if you remember a while back, I made a video where I showcased, the Pi-hole where I made network-wide ad blocking. These are affiliate links, meaning that this is all designed, from my understanding, to effectively benefit Opera, okay? They're basically, from my understanding, making money off of it. According to their terms, while the browser is free, they make money off of actual advertisements. And again, where it gets a little bit shady, for instance, not shady necessarily, where it gets a little bit weird too is like, oh, look at that, Jedi Survivor is free. Okay, wait, is it really free? Oh, I have to go to Microsoft through this, link and just sign up for Game Pass. So I don't know if you can necessarily even call that free. But you have to ask yourself if this is necessarily something that you consider worth it. Obviously, GX Corner is their own video series. You can watch their VTuber. And again, it's all centered around upcoming games and whatnot. Now, do I think that you should have this available at any moment? So obviously, as I'm browsing tabs, for instance, if I'm, entering google.com and I'm opening multiple tabs right here. I got a bunch of tabs, blah, 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 blah. Let me just search for random stuff here. Mutahar. You can see that I've got, 3 tabs open, but I really have 4 tabs at the end of the day. So if I close all these, I ultimately come to the GX Corner. So you really have to ask yourself if this is a necessity and if this is really something that you consider ultimately useful. Now, when it comes to the topic of privacy, I wanted to just show you where you can actually get a quick idea of open source tests for web browser privacy. Now, this is privacytest.org, and if you're looking carefully, we're just going to stick to the desktop browsers. But over on the top, you can see that they cover, tests for iOS, Android, and the various nightly builds, which are nightly releases of development versions of said browsers. Now, out of all these browsers, Opera GX isn't listed, but the closest is obviously going to just be Opera 111, which is Opera GX, from my understanding, without the GX stuff added into it. It's the standardized Opera browsing experience, which is still based on Chromium. Now, out of all these browsers, there's only a couple here that actually get the full check list. You can see in the state partitioning tests, Brave, Firefox, LibreWolf, Mullvad, iOS's Safari, not iOS, but Apple Safari, and Tor actually succeed throughout all of these tests. Navigation-wise, you can see that none of these tests are completely ironclad. HTTPS tests, only 3 browsers pass: LibreWolf, Mullvad, and Tor. So when it comes to safety and security and privacy and anti-tracking, and ad blocking, or really anything, Opera itself isn't even an industry leader. And again, if privacy was your important concern, you should probably use something like LibreWolf, which is, from my understanding, Firefox-based, or just straight up stick to Mullvad. And again, the ultimate privacy test is ultimately just using Tor browser. So again, for anybody that wants to, use privacy as a selling point, I wouldn't even recommend Brave, which is what I typically use. If privacy is your concern and you want to have the utmost security and you don't want to have anybody that tracks you whatsoever, maybe it is time you go to an anti-tracking browser, or you go to Firefox or something in that basis. So in that department, I also wanted to bring this up as well. Now, moving on, one of the important things that was mentioned was the VPN that Opera has. Now, Opera has a VPN built into their system, which, from my understanding, is more so a proxy than it is a traditional VPN, where as soon as you flip on the free VPN or paid from Opera, it all exists within the scope of the browser. Now, there is no reason to be surprised by this. Most browser VPNs do this, or just proxies to something else. Now, based on how Opera GX works, they claim that they do not store any log whatsoever. Now, this kind of goes on into, again, trusting them, right? One of the reasons why I don't take VPN sponsorships anymore, unless it's, Mullvad, for instance, they came up and sponsored us. The only way I could ever take a VPN sponsorship is if your company has actually been raided by the state police and you did not have to hand over a single shred of data. That is the only way to trust any of these companies, period, at least in my opinion. So I don't have anything to dog about Opera's VPN aside from the fact that obviously I don't trust any free VPN service. A free VPN service typically means you are the product. But it's probably great, like most free VPNs, for, again, getting rid of geo-blocking restrictions. Like, for instance, if you want to watch American Netflix, but you live in Canada, you can bypass those geo restrictions, provided that Netflix doesn't stop you. And same thing for any other service. But when it comes to actually, privacy, right? Like making sure that you're logging into, I don't know, the IRS, your banks, or something really sensitive, I wouldn't recommend any VPN. Unless it's like Mullvad. That's probably the only thing I can put my money towards. And that's because they've been raided by the feds and they never had to give up any information. So that's like the only thing going for them, right? But yeah, that's really where I stand on with the privacy and whatnot. And now the next big conspiracy that was kind of brought up, and this is really huge, is the allegations of Chinese spyware. Now, one thing I want to talk about, obviously, is Opera and the Chinese spyware allegations. So, according to Opera's Wikipedia page, they actually talk about how in 2016 they were acquired by an investment group led by a Chinese consortium. So, two of the actual groups listed here was Kunlun Tech and Qihoo 360. Now, in 2022, Opera actually started purchasing some of their shares back, but if you go to Kunlun Tech's company page, you can actually see that Opera is listed as, basically right on their company, okay? And this is Kunlun Tech. They are China's leading internet platform overseas enterprise. Now, obviously, the fear here is because a Chinese organization has money put into it, China's national intelligence law can basically ask any company under their wing to, governments can say, hey, give us that piece of data on this specific person over national intelligence, and you have to comply. Now, the thing about this is Opera has actually made a debunking page, which I think is a pretty good debunk of this entire situation. Now, what they talk about is they are a European company headquartered in Oslo, Norway. Now, because they're part of the EEA, which is the European Economic Area, you basically have to be compliant with something known as GDPR, which is one of the strongest data protection frameworks in the world. So because the company is headquartered in Norway, the law basically protects, people internationally, even if you're in the United States, because they're a European company, the data is routed through them, that because of their, GDPR standards, because of the law, they have to give you privacy preservation and data protection regulations. Now, the thing about this whole situation, too, is going down further. They also talk about the fact that they are obviously traded publicly on the stock market. And the thing is, if they weren't transparent about any of this stuff, then this could absolutely harm them financially. Actually, it would be very illegal for them to lie to shareholders. So I feel just off of these 2 points, it's not necessarily something that I can say is, the whole thing about spyware is, look, at the end of the day, if you use software from China or the United States even, or really any big country, there's a chance that you are getting spied on, obviously, right? There's a chance for it. And this is probably the best response that the company could actually put forward. This is not going to convince somebody that was already staunchly, against Opera. But I think it's a fair response that they can give by basically telling people, look, if you don't trust us, trust the law, right? Which I think is a fair thing to say. A lot of companies follow GDPR compliance because breaking this law can absolutely destroy you in that part of the world, okay? So again, to whittle it on into this situation, right? Clearly, if you're worried about the situation, you probably have more to worry about with installing a rootkit level antivirus on or an anti-cheat on a big game that is financed by Tencent. Or if you're using TikTok, especially the mobile applications, you probably have more to worry about being spied from there than a browser like this, okay? That's realistically where my mind comes into in this situation. Now, one of the things that people brought up to me was the browser telemetry. Now, from 2021 on Size of Cat, they did again, experiment based on what telemetry these browsers were doing when they were initially fired up. So you can see on things like Firefox and Brave, there are connections on startups. And a lot of these connections are mostly towards the relative browser domain. So Mozilla communicates to Mozilla.com. Brave communicates to Brave.com. And of course, Opera is brought up. This isn't suspicious to me because a lot of these features are, again, things like weather.opera-api.com, which if you have a weather application or a weather widget, it simply calls upon that in order to give you weather information in your relative area. So this isn't really suspicious. You can look at this as extra bloat you may not need in a browser you probably want to be completely optimized. But yeah, this is where my stance is on the Chinese spyware allegations. Again, I think Opera gave the best response that they could. And if you are worried about spyware, then maybe just don't trust this operator. Maybe don't trust this browser. But they gave the best actual response to this, personally, in my opinion. So at the end of the day, as I sit in the dark and ponder, is this worth, absolutely pushing onto gamers? I think if you're somebody that's sponsored by Opera GX and you find it amazing, I want to preface this by saying there is no ill will to anybody, okay? At the end of the day, I didn't want to make a hit piece on Opera. I simply wanted to actually research this for myself just to see if it was even worth considering as a sponsor. And look, even after with all the controversies, things like the Chinese spyware allegations, which ultimately I think Opera had a great response to. I think after all the testing and seeing that it was no worse or better in terms of performance than any other browser, ultimately it never really, in my opinion, succeeded in any department. If you care about privacy, you might as well consider using Mullvad or LibreWolf. And if you cared about efficiency, there were all those other Chromium browsers that were far more efficient in the long term. If you wanted to use Brave or just regular Google Chromium or just the Chromium Project browser without any connection to any, big company or big group or consortium, then there were always better options. Now, when I look at things like the GX Corner, which again is just a tab that exists to keep release dates in mind, which, look, most people, they're going to know the release dates they care about anyways. I don't think a few Flash games is going to entice anyone, and I think free game offers and deals and links to their YouTube pages and channels isn't a help to anyone, and it's a feature that I think ultimately is probably not going to be used by many gamers out there. Now, when you look at things like the CPU limitations and the GPU limitations, I really feel like it's snake oil being peddled to gamers who think that these are things that are going to give them an edge or it's going to make their systems better in general. Look, at the end of the day, your operating systems in general will do a far better job at managing your computer's resources than you will ever do in your own right. And most modern web browsers are very, very good in many departments anyways, okay? And even if Chrome uses up all of your RAM anyways, right? What the fuck is unused RAM there for? Just existing? It's fine. Your computer is going to manage things better. And in many cases, even based on those Cyberpunk 2077 tests that I did, no browser was ever better or worse. In fact, every single one of them fit well within the margin of error. So you shouldn't really be thinking this is going to give you any advantage as a gamer. It's not going to give you any more privacy. It's not going to give you anything. I think as a browser, it might be a decent jack of all trades, but there are, in my opinion, far better options. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. Ultimately, look, I get a great laugh out of their social media teams, but as somebody who's, one of my channel's pillars and brand is, talking about computer safety and cybersecurity and safety and privacy, with all of the history and baggage that this browser has, and again, one of the sole key facts that I'm not using something that is open source at the end of the day, I genuinely cannot recommend Opera GX. I don't trust it, I wouldn't use it, and I wouldn't recommend it. But hey, your computer is up to you. It's your choice. Use whatever you want. This is just my video. I wanted to get my piece out there. Not even a hit piece, I just wanted to get my findings out. So again, let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.